This is Keys to the Shop, episode 258, Prioritizing Your Mental Health in the New Year with Dr. Laura Pence. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. So glad to have you with us today. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the show, just hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if this episode or other episodes have really been helpful for you and your business, would you give us a 5-star review over at iTunes? That would really help the ranking of the show, and it would also help the visibility, get these episodes out there to more people. And thank you so much for those of you who have already done that. Now, I want to let you know that Keys to the Shop offers consulting and coaching for you and your business. Whether you're just getting started in the coffee industry, opening your first store, and you need an advisor to help you along the way get started on the right path, or you are an established business and you want to take your operations, your quality, and your people to the next level, Keys to the Shop Consulting can work directly with you on site or remotely to help you do just that. If that's you and you're interested in learning more about Keys to the Shop Consulting, just go ahead and send me an email, chris@keystotheshop.com. I would love to hear from you and see what we can do to help you really level up your operations. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, Keys to the Shop is brought to you by the people supplying you with amazing commercial coffee equipment. That is none other than Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is one of the best in the world at supplying you with espresso machines, grinders, brewers, under-counter refrigeration, the whole shebang, really. And one of the reasons they're so good at this is not just because they curate the best equipment from all over the world, but they also work to match that equipment with your specific needs or your context. And let's face it, when you're opening a business or you're expanding your business, one of the biggest expenses is the equipment itself. And you want to know that the people selling you the equipment are going to be in your corner the whole way. And that is exactly what Prima Coffee does. To let them know that you came from this show, go ahead and visit the website prima-coffee.com/keys. And you can also get 5% off your entire order by using the code KEYS5 at checkout. So a really generous offer using the code KEYS5 at checkout at prima-coffee.com/keys. And if you're in the market for commercial equipment, again, I don't think you can get better than Prima Coffee. Now, today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. The Barista Series is a plant-based performance beverage like no other. Pacific has built the Barista Series for baristas and with the feedback of professional baristas across the globe to make sure that it performs on your bar the way you really want a plant-based beverage to perform. Your customers are going to love the fact that it stands up to the heat from the steaming process. Any of the beverages in their extensive line will create amazing texture for latte art, and it will keep the flavor of the beverage focused on the coffee. With plant-based beverages continuing to skyrocket in popularity and outperform milk in many, many cases, you want to serve your customers the best, and I believe that the best out there is Pacific. So go to the website, pacificfoodservice.com, check them out, get it in your store and try it for yourself. If you really want to serve the best, then I think the choice is clearly going to be the Pacific Barista Series. Okay, everyone. Well, today I think we have a really great episode in store for you. We are going to be talking about your mental health. And that is something that is at the top of all of our minds, really, because of all that we've been through this year. On top of the pandemic, there's just the normal wear and tear that happens in the customer service industry when you're facing people all the time and you're under stress and you have to perform. It really is hard to manage your mental and emotional health. And this is why we've done some episodes on this in the past, and why today I felt like it was a really great way to end the year of 2020. And it is a call to prioritize our mental health. And to explore this topic in depth and give us some guidance going into how we can do that is our guest, Dr. Laura Pence. Dr. Pence holds a doctorate degree in psychology and her master's in business administration from Widener University. And in her early career, in her practice, she worked primarily with people suffering from eating disorders, anxiety, and depression, doing individual work and group workshops. And she later branched out to work more specifically with entrepreneurs who are looking to elevate their leadership skills and needed support in understanding the mind-body connection and its impact on performance. Then in 2018, Dr. Pence began consulting for Spartan Race, the largest endurance racing organization in the world, and she worked closely with the CEO and founder Joe DeCina to implement a curriculum that provides a mental pathway to change and transformation. Dr. Pence also works at the Unbeatable Mind coaching program alongside Mark Divine. And recently, Dr. Pence launched her own product, LifeBox, a tool used to strengthen mental health and wellness. And she began her own podcast called Curious Minds with Dr. L, where she and her guests use curiosity as the cure for stagnation. So definitely be sure to subscribe to that podcast. Dr. Pence also serves on the board of directors for various nonprofit organizations and has been featured in various publications, media outlets, and podcasts like Good Morning America, BBC, Glamour, Vogue, WebMD, Psychology Today, and the Huffington Post. In this conversation with Dr. Pence, we're going to be approaching the topic of this year and its impact on us. And specifically, we're going to be talking about how we can approach the topic of mental health from a customer service professional standpoint. We're going to be talking about things like the masks we wear, how we can maintain a healthy balance as professionals going into work and leaving work, and how we can approach our own mental health in a way that builds our resilience and doesn't compromise who we are in the process. And this is a critical conversation, one that I was very encouraged to have with Dr. Pence, and I think that you'll be encouraged by it too. And again, this is a great way, I think, to enter into the new year, prioritizing our mental and our emotional health. And Dr. Laura Pence is the perfect person to guide us through this process. And so without any more from me, let's get right to the interview. Here now is my conversation on prioritizing your mental health with Dr. Laura Pence. Well, Laura, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the show. I'm excited to talk to you today.
I appreciate you reaching out. I love interesting conversations with interesting people who are doing interesting things. So I'm excited to be here.
This obviously is a topic that we could talk about all day long, and every professional industry has their own challenges with mental health and just making sure that people are taking care of themselves and those that are in their employ. And we're kind of talking to both people in this situation, a lot of the people out there being owners and also others that are just saying, like, how do I survive in the midst of my work and pandemics and all that stuff? You have such an interesting view into the world of the psyche of a large swath of people. I wonder if you could just share with us how you've seen this year kind of impact people's mental health compared to what you normally see in your practice.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting year. And there are two sides to this that I think are really interesting. And of course, one side is that the pandemic and a lot of other stuff too that happened this year, a lot of the social unrest and political divide and economic disruptions. I mean, there was just so much, has certainly impacted individuals' mental health in a way that we haven't seen before in terms of the increase in some of the numbers we're seeing. Adults are reporting, for example, 3 times more anxiety symptoms than normal. Adults are reporting 4 times more depressive symptoms than sort of the average given year. So we are certainly seeing individuals struggling with managing their emotions. And in so many ways, you sort of have to say, well, right, because this has been such a hard year. So there's a part of me as a psychologist, of course, that is always looking for, what's congruent. When an individual comes into my office, for example, and they're explaining to me that they're really, really anxious, and we talk about what they're particularly anxious about, there are certainly times where I say, well, right, that makes sense. I mean, you're up for this massive job that you want really badly and you've worked really hard for. So it kind of makes sense that you're anxious about it because it matters so much to you, versus somebody who might come in and they just got a parking ticket and now they're terrified that they're going to go to jail and that they're going to be arrested. And it's like, well, the anxiety might not be so congruent there. So, I think one of the things that's really interesting here is that, yes, we are seeing a rise in anxiety symptoms and depressive symptoms, and certainly for many people, a reemergence of trauma symptoms as well. And there is a part of me that says, well, right, because this year's been really hard and there has been things to worry about. And we have been thrown into a situation that we have never been in before with the pandemic. And so it makes sense that we have more concern and more worry, and people are more sad than usual because they have lost loved ones or lost jobs or lost particular situations in which they felt comfortable before, and now they're sort of thrown into chaos. So, there is that too, that I think we're actually maybe not talking about as much, that some of the symptoms that we're seeing are kind of congruent with what's going on. But we are seeing that rise, which is something to pay attention to. And the other thing too that I think is really interesting that I'm seeing in my own practice, because oftentimes people will say, oh my gosh, you must be so busy now. People are probably flocking to you with the desire to enter into therapy and work on the things that are difficult for them this year. And actually, I have seen a phenomenal amount of resilience in my practice, and a really extraordinary example of actually what humans are capable of handling, which I also think maybe is a little bit going missed right now, is actually, how resilient we can be. And, when all we want to do is lie in bed all day because it seems like the world is on fire, in some pieces literally on fire, we actually don't. We can get up and we can go to work, and there's a resiliency there that I think is really impressive. So I've really tried to shine a light on that with not only my clients, but with individuals who are asking, just like you did, about, it must be so hard right now. And yes, yeah, it is. But we are also seeing this resilience, which is pretty amazing.
Is this a wake-up call for a lot of people then, that they see that this is something that they haven't prioritized in the past, but now that it seems like with such extreme circumstances around them that they just really need to make it a priority now?
I think so. My hope, of course, is that it will stick. That individuals certainly are more interested now in mental health. I know that, for example, even particular technology companies this year that rolled out, apps that do therapy via telehealth and things like that have really sort of gone through the roof in terms of their success. My hope is that it sticks, because, oftentimes there's a red shiny object of what's going to sort of, get me out of this right now. But the truth is we need to make mental wellness and mental health and mental strength and mindset a priority all the time. It's so important, and we are so good at, for example, prioritizing our physical health and trying to get to the gym or trying to eat the right foods or, making sure that we're hydrating. And we're not even very good at that as a society in general. But I think we often prioritize that over our health and well-being. And so, I do think that it was certainly a wake-up call for some. And I think the other thing that was a wake-up call was the value systems that individuals have. I heard that a lot in my practice. It certainly showed up for me in my own life as well. And I saw it in a lot of organizations that I consult with as well. This real reflection on what do we value as an organization, and what do I value as a human, and how have I been ignoring that for a long time and maybe gotten wrapped up in the scrolling or the scanning or the social media or the hustle to, be perceived a certain way, when in fact what I value is X, Y, and Z. And, we've had a lot more time to think this year about things. And I think that is something that people are thinking more about, is what they value, which is really in so many ways one of the centerpieces of mental health.
Yeah, and organizational health as well. And like you said, so many people taking a forcible step back, like it's not voluntary for a lot of people. And we've spoken on the show about this, where it has forced a lot of people to become a little bit more lean with what they do, or just, is this something that I wanted to do? It interrupted my momentum of a direction that I actually didn't want to be going. And
that's right.
This has given me the excuse to sort of make the radical change that I could never give myself the push over the edge to do.
Chris, I think that's an excellent point. And I think individuals are also seeing this in their relationships. I have certainly seen individuals take a little bit more inventory on what it is about the relationship that they're in, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship or a collegial relationship. What are they getting out of that, and what's missing? that they really want, that they can focus a little bit more on. So yeah, that part of this year, I think, has been really interesting to see. And again, my hope is that it sticks, right? My hope is that it's, we're not just throwing it against the wall and it's going to be gone in a year or two, but that we really allow ourselves to focus more on our mental well-being every single day, not just when we're forced to.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because you have the role of chief mind doc at Spartan Races, and that seems like, in my mind, when I think about that, I'm thinking, okay, well, people need to be on their game mentally when they are competing in these things, but it seems project-based in a sense where it's convenient for me, just like you were describing, like this is good for me to get what I want in the moment. But, crossing over into off-season mental health, just like if there's competitions in coffee where people will hire sports psychologists and they will, get ready for the presentation and all this stuff. And I just wonder, what is the key to making it stick with, at least maybe this crosses over with what you do, the racers that you work with, so that they are not just like starting from scratch next year, and it's actually been something that they've been performing on themselves, that preventative maintenance for their mind and their emotions. Like, what's the key to really making that stick?
That's a great question. And I think it's a really simple answer, though not easy, which is values. Oftentimes we get, just as you said, we get super hyper focused on the product, right? On the end result. And I've worked a lot with athletes in my time, and also with, CEOs and individuals at the top. And it's interesting because in a lot of ways, they have similar minds. They're very competitive, and they are really in so many ways going for the gold, no pun intended. And so one of the things that I work with these individuals on is really tying what they're doing to a value system. And the value system is much more about process than it is about product. It's much more about what about all of what I'm doing feels good for me in every single moment because it's aligned with a particular principle that I hold up, versus I'm going just for gold because that seems really cool and I want to have a medal around my neck, or I want to, beat out this other company and end up acquiring them because I don't want any other competition in this space, right? And if we focus in on values, I think values really become in so many ways like the compass through which we can make choices and decisions. Yes, absolutely. In competition or out on the race course or in business, if we're asking ourselves, for example, if honesty is one of the values of a particular company or a human being, and you ask yourself, well, is this decision that I'm about to make in alignment with that value of honesty? Am I being honest with the players involved? Am I being honest with myself about what I really want? That can really help us in making the choice either way, left or right, up or down, or yes or no. And I think that the thing about values that I think sticks is that they really are sort of like these guiding principles that can continue and stick with us through life. And yes, they change. Like certainly what I valued when I was 20 is not what I value now as a business owner and a mother of 2 children and a wife. However, if I am allowing myself to shift my values just because of, what matters to me now is different than what matters to me 5 years ago or 5 years from now, it still acts the same way. It still guides my choices and guides my decisions. And I think that really allows individuals to regularly focus on their mental health, because in so many ways, that's all about integrity, right? If our values are in alignment with our behaviors, and vice versa, if our behaviors are in alignment with our values, we inherently feel better. And it doesn't always feel good sometimes, because sometimes we can make really hard choices that are painful choices. But when we are in integrity, when we are integrating together our behaviors with our value system, we inevitably feel better. We have less anxiety, we have less depression, we have less addiction, we have better relationships. So that values work is something that I focus on quite a bit.
Yeah, that reminds me of just how you're reinforcing your identity, like
Yes.
that all aligns, and you feel clear in your conscience. You haven't betrayed yourself and not acted in a way that is contrary to who you are. And it really kind of it makes me want to ask about, particularly in the service industry, where it's kind of, you're putting on a show.
Mm-hmm.
And the show is not about you and your identity necessarily. It's the corporate identity. People sometimes wear shirts and badges and, outfits and other things like that. But there's a certain sense in which you take part of yourself and push it aside, and then bring another self to work and then kind of reintegrate. It sounds very sci-fi. But in this separation from yourself and back and forth in the service industry, I can't help but think that there's something there that really does erode at that congruity, that resilience that we want to have, but almost feels like from the outside environment that we're almost not allowed to have that. I mean, I wonder if you could address that a little bit. How do we manage showing up at work and also not really betraying those values?
Yeah, another great question. And it's interesting actually when you sent the email with maybe some questions you would ask, and this one was on it, and you mentioned the word masks. The first thing I thought of, because we're in COVID times, is literally the mask that people are wearing while they're serving, which I think is sort of interesting, actually, just as a society, this metaphor that we've always lived with, or truth that we've always lived with, which is that we do wear masks. And now, in fact, this entire year has sort of been absorbed in that and the debate around that. But I love that question, because I think, one, I think it's a really important one. And two, I think it extends outside of the service industry for sure, in the sense that, for example, as a psychologist with my clients, there could be something going on at any given moment that is hard for me, for example. Let's say, for example, one of my kids just got, in trouble at school. And then all of a sudden I have a client that I need to see, and I need to create space for that client to feel safe and to engage in the work that they need to engage in. So one of the things that I think is really important as we consider your question is to know that, in a lot of ways, what it feels to me like individuals in the service industry are doing in that moment is really working to survive, and really working in so many ways to thrive as well, because they're adapting to the situation that they're given. And I think that there is a place for integrating one's values into that work. And I'll give you an example of that. So let's just use humor, for example, right? And let's say an individual has a value system in which humor is one of their top principles. They love to laugh. They love to make people laugh. It's just who they've always known themselves to be. Maybe they've always been the class clown, or really found a lot of joy in making people smile. And here we are, right? And they're in the service industry. And the question is, during this really difficult time, where does that show up? And I think it could show up for sure at work. But I think the individual also has to ask themselves the question, like, is it my responsibility in all moments to make people laugh and to be the funny one? But is there a way that I can weave in joy to my work? Is there a way that can show up for me at work without clouding any judgment that I might have that day, right? Without prioritizing this value of joy over the responsibility of what needs to get done. But is there a way that I can integrate joy into my responsibility, or integrate humor into my responsibilities? And listen, the truth is that sometimes maybe the answer might be, gosh, that just doesn't fit here. It just doesn't fit right now that this value is going to show up for me. And that's okay. I think as long as we're checking in with ourselves and becoming self-aware, like in this moment, I might need to wear a little bit of a mask to survive in my job. And I don't I don't actually necessarily mean like survive, be alive, but I mean just survive, keep my job, make sure that I'm providing good customer service. Does that in any way, does that desire to survive maybe fit in with another value that I have of wanting to do good work or wanting to be a leader? So I think the masks, certainly when an individual might not be aware of when they're wearing one or when they put theirs on versus when they take it off, I think that can sometimes be a struggle. I think it all stems with becoming more self-aware and understanding, in this moment, I'm going to put on a little bit of that mask today. That the purpose of the mask is to help me survive and thrive. And here's when I take it off, and here's what happens when I take it off. And that's okay. I think, again, as long as like our value system is intact, we're way less likely to fall into that trap that you mentioned, where it sort of erodes at our identity. And I think individuals struggle with that erosion when they're not checking in with themselves regularly.
Yeah, great point. And being responsible to sort of take an audit of your values as you go throughout your work week. And I mean, if you do that and you find that there's a troubling pattern, I guess it might also be true that you're in an environment where it is not healthy for you to be in, because oftentimes we want baristas or we want any, a line worker of some kind to pull up the slack for the environment that is provided to them. And that environment might actually just be a toxic environment. That's right.
That's absolutely right. I think that's an excellent point. And I have certainly been in that very situation where, for example, for me, I'm not uncomfortable by hard conversations. It's probably because of the work that I've done for 15 years and having to have hard conversations with my clients. But one of the things that I hold up as a value is being honest, and hard conversations are a part of that, because normally if you're honest, you're having hard conversations often. And I have certainly been a part of organizations in which hard conversations don't happen. And that ties back to the value of people are not honest. And I've had to really have some gut check conversations with myself around, where do I fit here? And am I compromising my value system by being here? Or maybe, is there a way for me to work with that? Is there a way for me to continue to hold up my value system in this environment and set the boundaries that I need to set so that the toxicity does not bleed into my experience necessarily, and I remain in integrity, even if the others around me choose not to? And that's, that's a hard line to put down, but an important one. And I think you make a great point that sometimes the answer is, I cannot survive in this toxic environment, and I might need to shift. I might need to go somewhere where it feels like my value system is more intact.
No, that's a great point too. It just goes back to the metaphor of the masks and the irony of our circumstance now, and how the certain masks are for survival and other masks are, well, obviously not, and they're detrimental to who you are as a person. It erodes at your identity. And I wonder, as we're talking about eroding our values, and there are other ways in which people erode their own mental health, or sort of don't really consider it over time, and it's like not doing preventative maintenance on a vehicle or an espresso machine or whatever. Eventually there's going to be a breakdown of some kind. I mean, what really causes us to, or what are some things that are most commonly seen by yourself that we allow to erode our mental and emotional health?
Yeah. So a big one that I see often is an unwillingness to set boundaries. When someone prioritizes availability over well-being, and especially now where we have the technology to be available all the time, virtually. If you can't text somebody, you can DM them on Instagram. If you don't DM them on Instagram, you can send them an email. If you don't email them, you can Slack them. If you don't Slack them, you can Snapchat them. I mean, there's 1,000 different ways to be available. And, it sort of speaks to that question, just because you can be doesn't mean you should be. Just because I can be available at any given moment doesn't mean that I should be available at any given moment. And we have really lost in so many ways the ability to set boundaries. And it's a hard skill to have anyway, and it's been made much more difficult with, I believe, technology. One of the best ways to set a boundary, in my opinion, is to turn off your notifications. Just even as I say that, I guarantee there are people who are listening that are like, is she kidding? I'm never going to turn off my notifications, because they're thinking, what if I miss something? What if I miss a text? What if I miss, an Instagram DM or somebody that sent me a comment and wants to collaborate but the erosion that happens when we fail to set boundaries is that we don't create a safe place for ourselves, because anybody at any time can intrude. And I think that has become really, really dangerous for us, because boundaries in so many ways are what keep us healthy. And going back to your original question of, how has this year impacted individuals' mental health? I think one of the ways in which people have really suffered and struggled is understanding how to set boundaries while working at home. That now that they work from home or are forced to work from home, it feels like, oh, well, the kitchen table is my desk all day long. So it doesn't stop at 5:00. Like I don't go home at 5:00. I'm just already home. So maybe work doesn't really stop until I go to bed. There's like this, there aren't these established boundaries that we've had for ourselves, literally leaving work, getting in a car to actually create the separation between when you're at work and when you're not at work. And I think, too, one of the other ways in which boundaries have been pushed this year is because, a lot of companies and organizations and small mom and pop shops have really had to slim down as much as possible in order to keep their doors open. They have demanded extra work of their employees. And I actually listened to one of your podcasts that you just had about going above and beyond. And I think that speaks so brilliantly to one of the struggles that individuals have right now is, they're sort of at this critical juncture of, if I don't go above and beyond, I might not have a job, because the people who aren't going above and beyond are getting furloughed, or they're getting laid off. And I think it has really eroded in so many ways our desire to set boundaries. We always have a capacity to set them. We just don't exercise that as much. So that's something that I'm seeing quite a bit.
That's amen to that. And not just because you referenced my own podcast, but that's boundaries. I had a talk once where it was like top 10 ways to lose employees. And the number one was don't set professional boundaries.
Yeah.
And when we have a tendency I don't know how prevalent this is in the corporate world, but especially in mom and pop type situations, as the name might even suggest, that people say, well, we're family,
Yes.
And there's this loyalty in family, and it's weird. It just makes it weird. And we are very good at adapting to dysfunction, and maybe conflating that with resiliency. So I could be very good at using a broken thing. That doesn't make it right for it to be broken. So I guess, the question would be like, how do we sometimes find solace in the fact that we're good at pivoting in the midst of these things and being, like I say, adapting to that dysfunction. But that's the kind of thing that needs to be interrupted. And lots of little habits that we have are built on this momentum. How do we interrupt that momentum when we are in need of clarity, but we don't have it? How do we even interrupt this pattern and ask ourselves the right questions to begin getting answers?
Yeah. So the first thing that pops up for me is hard conversations. Obviously we have to have hard conversations with ourselves about whether it's values, is what I'm doing right now in alignment with my values. Another hard conversation we have to have with ourselves is, how long can I really keep this up? How healthy is this for me now? What am I losing versus what am I gaining in this situation? I think hard conversations are something that we have to have more often with ourselves. And they're hard for a reason, because painful emotions come up in those conversations. We might feel like a disappointment. We might feel like we're not good enough. We might feel like, I can't hang with the best of them because I'm asking myself, how can I get out of this situation? And there's probably nobody else asking themselves that question. They're just grinding and putting in the work and putting in the time. And shame is a big one. Our belief that we're unworthy and that we're not doing enough. So I think we have to have more hard conversations with ourselves, and that takes time out. When we have hard conversations with ourselves, we have to take ourselves out for a second, right? It doesn't mean that we have to leave a job. It doesn't mean that we have to even go home early. It just means that when it might feel really good to turn on Netflix and watch Dexter, instead, we might have to just sit and have a conversation with ourselves around, gosh, what does this really look like right now? And who am I? Who have I become? And we have to have hard conversations with other people. We have to have conversations with our team and say, listen, we are struggling here. And we know that we are asking you to do more work than you're getting paid for. How do we fix this? And to collaborate with each other and to be vulnerable with each other. One of the reasons why, I entitled my own podcast, Curious Minds, is because I think we've lost the willingness to get curious. We're so attached to knowing all the time and knowing the answers. And we feel like if we don't know the answers and we come to the table with a question instead of a statement, then we're looked at as weak. And I think we have to ask way more questions and end way more sentences with a question mark than a period. And I think that's part of having a hard conversation, is going into the conversation not knowing, going to your boss and saying, I'm feeling so burnt out, but I'm terrified that if I don't show up tomorrow and put in my 70th hour of work this week, that I'm going to get fired. How do we manage this? Because I don't want to get fired and I like working here, but this is a real difficult time. It's hard for us to say those words out loud, but I think hard conversations are part of the solution.
Well said. I think that part is so multifaceted, because as a employee who has done those 70-hour weeks for months on end and not felt like I needed to, or like I had the ability to even have that conversation, to a guy who has been in management and been told I was pretty unapproachable and it really hurt. Mm-hmm. There's no telling, from both ends of the spectrum, there's this communication gap where if I was a manager and somebody came to me and said exactly what you just said, not only would it sting a little bit because I'd realized that I had provided an environment that nurtured fear in some way, but it would also make me very happy to alleviate that person of that particular weight. But then there's that fear. So the fear the person has is very real. What would you tell us to do to get over that fear, or not just get over it, but it's like we're standing on an atrophied leg at this point. If we're taking that first step, it feels like you say it's really hard, but how do we do that and not just feel like, oh, this is stupid, and then just turn back and go back to the way things were?
Yeah, that's a great question. You ask really great questions. You must spend a lot of time in coffee shops having conversations. So a couple things. One, and you corrected yourself, which I love. I think it's not about getting over fear. It's about understanding it, right? And at the most primal level, we become afraid because we feel there's a threat. And so, for example, if we're afraid of having a difficult conversation with someone, it's often because we are afraid that we won't survive, right? And again, I know right now it's maybe even taboo to use that word because individuals in so many ways are actually not, but we are afraid of the threat of maybe being seen as weak, the threat of actually maybe being fired, the threat of being seen as not as not as much a willing employee as somebody else. So I think the thing is, though, it's okay to be scared. Having hard conversations, part of the reason they're hard is because fear is driving them so often. And fear is at the center stone, and vulnerability as well. And people are terrified of vulnerability. They don't like to talk about it. They don't like to do it. And we have a lot of beliefs around vulnerability as being a sign of weakness. And I think I'll tap into what you said around, if you were an employee and you had somebody come to you, yes, it might sting. And, there's an and there because we can hold the tension of opposites. You would also be glad. You would also be happy that they came to you and that perhaps you could provide a solution that, oh, by the way, you've had all along. You just didn't know they needed, So I think again, it kind of goes to that curiosity piece around try not to assume that the individual that you're about to have a hard conversation with, is going to see the conversation as something that maybe you're worried they might see it as. Try and get curious around what if this conversation is really productive. Oftentimes with the what ifs, we always go to that negative place. Like, well, what if I get fired? Or what if this doesn't go the way I want? Or what if my boss, sees me as totally weak? Well, what if they see you as strong? What if they're like, man, this is the kind of leadership we want around here. How about a promotion? What if all the other things too, not just the things that scare you?
I like that. So you're assuming the positive intent, the positive results. And to be honest, it really feels silly to say it to yourself. Like, we are very good at assuming the negative and highlighting it. But when I say to myself, I'm going to have a good day, I'm like, listen to you. Would you get back from a conference? Yeah, it's weird. But
You're right.
Yeah. But why we're just naturally cynical people.
Well, there is something called negativity bias, which is, our tendency. And again, this kind of goes back to our survival instinct, our tendency to look for and focus in on what's not right. Because if if back in the old days when we were trying to just survive the tiger, if you're scanning around and looking at the landscape and you're just, oh, I love the flowers and this is so beautiful. And you're like, oh, there's a tiger there, but no big deal. You're going to die. The tiger's going to eat you. So immediately you're focusing in on the tiger of like, oh, shoot, I've got to stay protected and get out of the woods. So negativity bias is a real thing. We tend to focus in on the negative, and it does feel uncomfortable and it does feel silly to use things like positive affirmations or to use the positive psychology of things to move us through them. The thing that I would say as a psychologist and a human behaviorist in so many ways is we've got so much data that this works, that this helps. Simply smiling improves your performance. So I think, sometimes I like to use the science of it to really just say, like, we've got the data here, especially to the individuals that are like, oh, that's just woo-hoo witchcraft stuff. It's like, well, no, actually, it's actual science that smiling and saying positive things to yourself actually helps your performance. We have so much data on that. So it might feel hokey, it might feel uncomfortable, but that's the point. The point is to do something different, right? The point is to actually get a little bit uncomfortable, because uncomfortable is often the catalyst for change.
And we wed the notion of negative with hard. So hard conversations have to be negative because hard feels bad. But because it makes me think, well, maybe that's just how we think of it, is that, well, we can't be a realist, which is also what pessimists like to say they are, and also have a positive outlook. It seems like the two are at war with one another.
Yeah. And again, I go back to this saying of holding the tension of opposites. Like, I think that we can observe what's around us, like what's around us right now, what's happening right now in the United States of America is painful and difficult and hard to watch and anxiety provoking and seemingly awful. And there's actually positive stuff happening everywhere. There are individuals helping other individuals that they never knew they could. And there are organizations that are rallying around their employees, and individuals at the top who aren't taking any pay in order to make sure that individuals at the bottom are staying in the organization. There are incredible things happening. We can hold both. And I think so often we feel like we can't. It can't be possible that two things are true. And I want to go back to your point of, when we think about hard conversations, we often think that it might be a negative conversation. I'll tell you what, some of the most hard conversations I've had have actually been the most honest in positive ways. I remember once I really wanted to tell somebody that I was working with just what an incredible leader I thought they were and how impactful they had been in my own life. And I tell you, I was more nervous for that conversation than for any conversation that revolved around, hey, I think this needs to change, or could we do this differently? So, I think it's interesting, our discomfort level with joy and with celebration sometimes, and stepping into the positive.
Oh, that is a fantastic point. Yeah, our bias toward, as managers, a lot of the folks that listen to this are managers and leaders, and we find the incongruities in the business, and we say, okay, we're going to adjust this, don't do that anymore. But then when we want to say something positive, it's usually pretty glossed over. We feel kind of hammy about it. And so I love your example there, because affirmation and speaking well and pursuing joy is sometimes completely off of our radar because we're so good at the other stuff. But as we're trying to coalesce our hopes for 2021 into reality, or this is going to be a better year, we got to think about ourselves, and we got to think about the people that we've been given the honor to serve in our leadership roles. I guess my last question to you would be, how do we take tangible steps to pursue both of those things, that are our emotional and mental health, in those two categories of the real work that needs to still happen in 2021, but should happen in a more healthy way?
Mm-hmm. So I'll go back to my first response to your question, which was values. If I had it my way, every person at the end of this year would be asking themselves, what do I value? And what do I want to hold up as, let's say, the 3? Oftentimes people want to pick 10 values. That's not going to work. It's really hard to be in alignment with 10 values at any given time, I will tell you. What are the 3 values that I want to live by in 2021 and really become the guiding principles for the choices and decisions that I want to make? So that would be one of the first things that I would want an individual to do. The second thing that I think can become really, really useful is asking yourself, who am I going to bring on my journey this year? Who can I go to in those vulnerable moments? Who can I speak to? Who can I get curious with? Who I trust, who is a trusted ally and somebody that I can show my all to. Because I think so often when we think about, what do we want for ourselves in 2021, we forget that we are social beings. Even if we're introverts, we are wired for connection. And, one of the things that keeps our mind the sharpest actually is having interactions with humans, because humans are the most difficult. They're the most complex. So I would really want an individual to ask themselves, who am I going to bring on this journey? My journey, my own journey as a human, not necessarily to work and, not necessarily on that adventure that I'm going to go on, but sort of more metaphorically speaking, who is going to be that person for me this year? And then you have to tell them. That's the thing, is you can't then make them this person and then not have a conversation with them about, listen, I'm going to need you in 2021. It's okay to have needs, by the way. I'm going to need you in 2021, and to have a conversation around what that might look like, I think is really important. And then, The third thing that I would want individuals to do in 2021 to focus on their mental health and their well-being is to get curious, is to really start to ask themselves the same questions that they've been asking themselves for years, but just with a different tone. The, what if becomes, what if, or the, why am I doing this becomes, why am I doing this? To just really shift the question a little bit. You're asking yourself that question anyway. But as we just reflected on, typically you're moving into that negative space with it. So how can you get more curious about it and operate instead of from a critical ego, from a curious ego, and be in inquiry? Because when you are in inquiry with yourself, you are in investment with yourself. And I think that's what I would want individuals to remember about 2021 is that curiosity piece.
I love that. And I love the investment part, and just investing in yourself. I bet you are better also at investing in other people if you get good at that too.
Yeah. Yes, when you are in inquiry with others, you are investing in them, which is what I think leaders at the top also need to do more of. They need to be in inquiry around how am I treating my employees as workers versus humans? How can I see this individual as a human rather than just somebody that does a job for me, and be in inquiry around them? I think that's really important as well.
Amazing. Laura, this has really been fantastic, and I'm certain that we could continue talking about this indefinitely. Where can we go to find more information, subscribe to your podcast, your website, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to drlaurapence.com. Laura is Lara, not Laura. My podcast is Curious Minds with Dr. L. You can find it on the usual place where you find podcasts. And I also recently launched a product that I'm really excited about called LifeBox. It's light plus life. So it's LIGHFBOX. And if you're interested in getting curious, it's 180 cards with prompts and questions that spark your curiosity and exercise your mind. So if you head over to LifeBox and you can put Curious Minds in at checkout, you'll get 15% off. But that's something I'm really excited about. So I would definitely encourage individuals to check that out.
For sure. We'll put that in the show notes, and that product looked really cool. So everyone definitely go out there and get that and subscribe to your show. Laura, again, this has really been fantastic, and you've done such a world of good for the Keys to the Shop audience. I thank you again.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's been a delight. I have enjoyed your interesting and introspective questions for sure.
Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that episode was helpful for you. Not just helpful, but I hope that it gave you a framework to understand how to approach your mental health going into this next year. We have been thrown so many curveballs in 2020. And if anything, I think we're all expecting the unexpected. But I think if there's a constant of prioritizing our mental health, we're going to be building this bank of resiliency to enter in and be more prepared for what is going to be thrown at us. And not only that, but we're also going to be more prepared to thoroughly enjoy the good things that come our way as well as we pursue being in a great place mentally and emotionally. And Dr. Pence did such an amazing job in our conversation, breaking these subjects down for us. Huge thank you to Dr. Pence for joining us on the show. We truly appreciate your work to help us all prioritize our mental health. Now, if you want more information about Dr. Laura and her LifeBox product, her podcast, her blog, and all the other great stuff that she's involved with, you can find it all on her website, drlaurapence.com. We'll put that in the show notes as well as a link to her Instagram. And you should also, of course, subscribe to her podcast, Curious Minds with Dr. L. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback about this episode or others on the show, please don't hesitate to give me an email. Just send your note to chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS at keystotheshop.com. And I would love to hear from you. Truly, I want to hear your feedback, and I want to make this show better for you all the time. And if you're interested in Keys to the Shop consulting too, chris@keystotheshop.com is the email to use. And can't wait to hear from you all. And with that, that is the end of our episode and the last, at least full-length episode of Keys to the Shop for 2020. Go out there and make prioritization of your mental health a reality in 2021. Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.